Thanksgiving and gathering with your family and friends, well, it's becoming a focal point in the ongoing COVID and culture wars. So let's dig into the conflict with Democratic strategist Kevin Walling, Fox News medical contributor Dr. Marty Makary, and the MAGA doctrine author Charlie Kirk. Welcome to you all. Good to have you.
Thank you. Hey, Shannon, good evening.
All right, I want to start with something from Dr. Michael Osterholm. He's a member of the Biden COVID-19 Advisory Board. He's an epidemiologist, among other things, infectious disease researcher. He says this: I'm smart enough to know when something's not going to happen. He had talked about this national lockdown. All I can do is hold it out there. It's going to be, mark my words, the only thing that will stop this runaway train. Doctor, is that the only thing that will stop this?
Absolutely not. Look, there's a lot of different levers that the government can pull. Out of everything, a national lockdown has a lot of bad consequences. It does slow down the transmission, but it can also create other health problems that are worse. Look, out of every single thing out there, the easiest thing, the simplest thing, the most effective thing is to have a requirement for masking at indoor public areas. We're not talking about your homes or beaches. We're talking about public areas like we do for secondhand smoke.
And to your point about the other consequences of the lockdown, this was Dr. Scott Atlas, who's taking a lot of incoming heat for people who don't agree with his position, including Stanford University, where he's part of the Hoover Institute. But here's what he said about the other part of these lockdowns, the other part of the equation you have to consider.
1 in 4 American college students, 1 in 4, age 18 to 24, thought of killing themselves in June because of the lockdown. I have children that age myself. We know what they're suffering from with isolation. Yep. And this kind of isolation is one of the unspoken tragedies of the elderly.
So, Kevin, where do we go from here? Because we hear about people who are also suffering because they're not getting medical screenings, they're not getting medical care. There's the mental health issue, people who are not getting treatment for addiction or even being able to go to their support meetings. How do you balance all those things?
Yeah, Shannon, it's a really difficult balance. Today we saw over 160,000 new infections across this country, and it is a delicate balancing act because there is a mental health toll that we're all experiencing as well. Many of us are not going home for Thanksgiving. We don't want to infect our older relatives, and it's a really difficult, like I said, balance that we have to weigh in the next couple of weeks with the holidays coming. But I'm encouraged to see at least some Republican governors, as we saw today with Kim Reynolds out of Iowa, others in North Dakota, Utah, West Virginia, moving forward with mask mandates on a state level by these Republican governors that realize that something has got to be done. And to the doctor's point, and it's a good one, a national lockdown is not what the president-elect is campaigning on or wants. But we've got to have some mitigation factors, and I think mask mandates, to the doctor's point, are a good solution, at least in the short run.
Well, a number of Biden advisors and those close to him are using those words, that there would be certain mandates and lockdowns, at least that they're advocating for and they would like to see. Now, here's something from Dr. Fauci in the New York Times. He says the government's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Fauci, said Tuesday that the nation needed a uniform approach to the coronavirus pandemic rather than a, quote, disjointed state-by-state response, a remark that echoed the views of President-elect Joseph R. Biden Jr. So, Charlie, if it's a uniform program, that to me sounds like it's not going to be left up to the states. And this idea of federalism, I'm not sure what a new administration could do on that front, but there is certainly discussion about it.
Yeah, it would likely be ruled unconstitutional, and rightly so. And one way that they describe Dr. Fauci is they say he's the nation's top infectious disease expert. It almost as if you're not allowed to criticize anything he said previously. A lot of things that he said back in the spring he has backtracked on, including masks, by the way. He said that masks will not work. That was back in spring. He has backtracked that. My default position on this is to trust people to make the best decisions and allow them to have liberty to do so. If people believe masks work, then give them the liberty to do that. But don't have a mandate. Don't make government get unnecessarily involved in the micromanaging of decisions. The same with family gatherings. People know now how this virus is transmitted. People now know the mortality rate. We know what people are most at risk. We must yield towards liberty. That is what always has made this country different. The European model model is to shut everything down and trust bureaucrats and civil servants and politicians to try and save us. In this country, we should always yield to local and state governance and, most importantly, liberty. And I am very concerned to see politicians in both parties try to re-embrace a failed strategy of lockdowns that, yes, has an incredibly costly toll all throughout mental health, suicide, depression, alcoholism, drug usage, small business, and the backbone of our country.
Well, Justice Alito last week said that it was essentially a stress test on the Constitution, that there are very real liberties and constitutional rights that are being crunched by some of these things, that he says these trends were in place before this happened, and he's hoping that people don't use the word emergency to label all kinds of things with this as an example or an excuse. All right, quickly, because we got to go, so I just want to run down the line here. We have sheriffs and others in New York and other places who say they're not going to enforce these things. They're not going to arrest people. Other state officials say they expect them to be enforced. Very quickly, should law enforcement be involved with enforcing these mandates? Yes or no? Doctor?
No, I don't think it makes sense to go that far.
Kevin?
When there's dangerous mass gatherings of over 100, 200, 300 people, we saw at dances and things like that, I think federal authorities or state authorities need to be involved.
Charlie?
No, and under that opinion, everyone should have been arrested for celebrating Biden's alleged win a couple weekends ago.
There are a lot of public gatherings out there. We do need to be consistent about those. Okay, Dr. Makary, Kevin, Charlie, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks. Good night.
Okay, an African-American police chief out of a job tonight, she says, because she cracked down on destructive vandals, including a number of black leaders. We investigate the claims next.